At Zen Essentials, our philosophy centers on inclusion and equality in our collective journey towards health and wellness. We invite our customers to embrace a skincare routine that goes beyond the surface, fostering a radiant connection between your skin and the nourishing elements we meticulously infuse into every product. Zen Essentials, because your health is essential.
Ryan the Farmer, Part 12.
I'm your host, Dr. Alexis Hazen. I'm a board-certified plastic surgeon who specializes in breast surgery and gender-affirming surgery and cosmetic surgery. I've been practicing in New York City for over 20 years and continue to learn and educate as an associate professor at NYU Langone. Please join me in our mission to discover Zen. Hi, welcome to the Dr. Zen podcast.
Hi, it's so good to
So
see you.
excited to have Eli Oberman, who is my former patient and I would say a friend. And he is also a musician, and he has a band called Low Tide. And I just found out he plays the mandolin and the violin.
That's right.
Which is so cool. And we'll have a link to your band so our listeners can check you out. But we are going to talk a little bit about his transition and then some things that happened along the way, which were unexpected, and also his brother's transition. So let's just start with like your story and your transition, and your pronouns are they, them, right?
That's right. Yep.
And just for our listeners and for our future listeners, you know, the language around transitioning, transgender issues, non-binary issues is changing constantly. So I always feel like if someone listens to this 6 months from now, I may have the wrong language. So I apologize. And it's it's an organic field of language. So forgive me, and know that I have the best intentions.
Ever changing.
Yeah. So yeah, tell us a little bit about how you came to want to transition and what that looked like.
Yeah. So, I identify as non-binary, but that was not something that, per what you just said, that wasn't something that existed when I came out.
Right. I mean, it always existed, but we just didn't have the language. Right.
Right. And so, so I was coming to this around 2000, 2001, and that wasn't language that existed. So, I identified as a trans man, and I used he, him pronouns at the time. But how I felt growing up was not the story that I heard about other trans people. Like, you think you were born into the wrong body, you like completely identify as the other gender. And I had always felt non-binary, I just didn't have language for that.
Yeah.
It was like, growing up, it was like, do you want the truck or do you want the doll? And I was like, sandbox, like that was my vibe.
Right.
And
so that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And there just
and
wasn't,
I really struggled with it. I really struggled with it at the time because I never identified as a man. But I was so uncomfortable and I was so unhappy. And I was a freshman and a sophomore at college, and that was having a really big impact on me. And I was able to read about trans people for the first time in my life, and, connect trans struggles to struggles for racial justice and, feminism and all of these things. And, it just felt like for the first time in my life, I saw something I could be that felt right.
And so then what did you do with that information? Because I think it's pretty, we're talking 2000. So this is now 23 years ago. And I was just starting to, as a surgeon, embark on some of gender affirming care, but it was pretty rare. And the Affordable Care Act hadn't passed. And so nothing was covered by insurance. And people it wasn't like common language or knowledge or So I'm sure you had sort of an uphill battle in terms of your coming out to people and your family and yourself.
It was a very rough time. And not a lot of people remember this, but at that time in New York specifically, it was also still not okay to be trans in queer community. So coming out also meant getting excommunicated from queer community and feminist community.
Right.
Luckily, that didn't last very long, which is sort of
Yeah.
how it got memory holds, but that was my experience. Um, and it was extremely difficult. I was also the first of everything, the
Yeah.
first person to get in trouble for using the wrong bathroom at my school, just, the first, I can't even think of how many people I was the first trans person they'd ever heard of. So yeah, it was very isolating. And I think because of my non-binariness, I was also feeling uncomfortable in transmasculine spaces as well, because I knew that I didn't feel the way that a lot of them felt.
But there wasn't a place for you. I mean,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yep.
there wasn't, like you said, there wasn't really the language, and there wasn't, so you were going to transition to become a trans man,
Yeah.
and but that didn't feel quite right.
And it was very disillusioning because I was so young, before I could start hormones, I had to attend a group therapy for a while at the LGBT center. And
Right.
so it
All the
was,
regulations have
yep.
changed. It used to be, it's hard to even imagine this, but to even be eligible for hormones, you had to jump through certain hoops, and then for surgery, originally it was you had to change your name. You had
Yep.
to be living as the opposite gender, and that's the language we
Yep.
talked about. And you have to be on hormones for 2 years. And now all of those requirements are different.
And I had people like, I mean, I just lied to psychiatrists. Like, I just was like, I was born in the wrong body. I've always identified as a man. You just said what you had to
Yeah,
say
no,
at the time.
100%. And people, yeah, because you knew the hoops you had to jump through.
Yeah.
So then
But in that group with all those other trans men was when I realized that I was like, oh, we're not the same.
right. And then did you start on hormones after
I did.
jumping through those hoops? Okay. And how did your family react? And how did they handle this information? Were they supportive?
No, it was horrible.
I'm sorry.
No, it's just what it is. It's just what it is. I will say, they were horrible in ways that I think most people can imagine.
Mhm.
They threatened to institutionalize me. They were helping support me while I was in college, and they threatened to, take the money away. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll get a job. It's fine. I already have a job. And just, I mean, there were just so many screaming fights, threatened to disown me, write me out of the will, whatever.
This is such a common story
Yeah.
of people your age and
Yeah.
who transitioned then, and still now. It sort of, I feel like it almost depends on, like, I don't know, where you live,
Yeah.
how people react.
And I
So
will I will say this also, like, this connects to Miller's experience too, my brother, because he was also not supportive, because at the time, because as I think so many people know, like, when you are struggling with all of that stuff internally and it feels so loaded, and he had been fighting back against people telling him that he was a boy his entire life, and so he was just on a totally, like, we identify very differently, our processes and our timelines were really different. And so I think it was really difficult for him to see me doing that at that time. And he was in San Francisco and I was in New York, and things were really different in San Francisco. And so, like, both of us identify as feminists. And so he was, experiencing all of these, people who were friends of his who were, saying that they were feminists, and then they were transitioning and just refusing to talk about it anymore, and
it was sort of like you were losing feminists in a way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my mom was very involved in second wave feminism. And so
Mhm.
I think part of the vitriol from her specifically was about her identity as a woman, but as the mother of two daughters. And
So-
so I think that not only was she reacting negatively to transness the way that lots of people's parents would, but I
Sure.
think it felt like it was an attack on her core identity.
And it was like you two as women were abandoning ship. And
Yeah.
yeah. So
And
just,
you know, transphobia, the logic doesn't make sense. So
no,
it's
of course not.
one minute she would be saying like, I don't see how anyone could ever see you as anything other than a woman. And the next minute she would be like, are you at sports bars ogling women with frat boys? And I was like, oh my God, what? Like, so
So Miller is your brother who was born female and transitioned also, but after you.
after me, and he's 4 years older than me. So it was, yeah.
So you really were the first. So then you started hormones, and how did that go?
That was wonderful because I was still young. I got to go to the Health Outreach to Teens program at the Callan Lord Center,
Mhm.
which is just the most supportive, loving environment I could ever have imagined. I just showed up and everyone knows your name and they gave me snacks and, you know, like, because another part of the protocols then was you had to let them give you your shot.
Oh, right. And how old were you then?
I think by the time I started, I was 19.
19. So you were in college and you went there and they administered the shots, and that felt like a supportive environment.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's good. That's
Yeah.
good.
I was very lucky on that front.
And then how did you feel once you started the testosterone?
You know, it took me a really long time because I, you know, going back to music, I'm also a singer. And one of the things I was most worried about was losing my singing voice.
Right.
And so, you know, again, all the protocols have changed, but what used to be normal was they would call half dose and full dose. Half dose is 0.5 millimeters every 2 weeks, and full dose is 1 millimeter every 2 weeks. And
True, true. There was no nuance. There
no,
was
no
no
nuance at all.
like titrating it for certain things. There was, yeah, and now it's much more, um, it's much more elaborate and nuanced.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what most people were doing at that time was being on half dose for like a couple months and then going up to full dose. And I stayed on the half dose for a year
Mhm.
because I intentionally wanted that
Like,
to be lower so that I
yeah,
could see
maintain
what was
your voice.
happening and try to adapt. And yeah.
And so then what happened to your voice?
Um, I you know, I was determined to do it and I was determined to still be able to sing. And so I just sang my way through transition. You know, like I think that I've talked about this with a lot of other people who have similar concerns. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think the worst thing that people can do is they're so afraid of what will happen and what their voice might sound like that they just stop using it.
Yeah.
And then by the time they try to start again, it's
It,
very hard. And
yeah.
so not impossible, not
Yeah.
impossible. But, you know, so I did vocal exercises every single day and I
Oh,
sang every day. And
so you maintained your voice.
yeah, I mean, there was definitely a moment where I was like, I hear the note in my head and what comes out is 3 notes lower. And so there was like a real recalibration that
Wow.
had to happen. But I do still have a singing voice that I love and feel good about. So.
And what were you an alto before?
I was an alto before, and
Now are you a like
I'm probably still a tenor or an alto,
tenor? Yeah.
but actually really interestingly, I think I was always singing in the lower part of my range because singing high felt gendered.
Mm,
And after I transitioned, it allowed me to explore the high part of my range.
it's so
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and so for example, on the album that Low Tide put out in 2019, I'm singing almost the entire album at the very, very top of my range. Um,
Wow.
and I really like it.
That's awesome. Did your voice ever go through that period where it cracks, or were you at a low enough
I
dose
don't
that
remember the
yeah.
cracking.
Because
Yeah.
that can happen when people go on the 1 milliliter, and that's hard. I mean, it's just hard no matter what. Unless you're 14. So
Yeah. I'm glad that I did that also for my speaking voice, not just my singing voice.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then flash forward, you ended up getting this like very unexpected diagnosis. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in 2010, I was 27, and
It was
I
2010.
2010, I know.
Wow. 15
And
years ago.
I felt a lump in my chest, and went through a whole bunch of rounds of testing and ended up getting a cancer diagnosis. They didn't initially know what stage it was because they had to do the mastectomy to figure that out. But
Mhm.
um, that made, a lot of people were sort of assuming that I would be very happy that even though having cancer was terrible, that being
Yeah.
able to get
Get surgery.
top surgery,
Yeah.
that I would be really happy about it. And while I do think I would have chosen that on my own eventually,
Eventually.
at that moment in my life, I was actually really happy with my body. And I was with a partner who made me feel really good in my body, including my chest. And um I wasn't ready. And so it was very isolating again from other trans masculine people, who afterwards they would assume that we had the same experience. And, you know, other people would talk about waking up from top surgery feeling like they were themselves for the first time in their life. And I went into top surgery knowing that when I woke up, they were going to tell me whether I was going to die or not.
Yeah.
So like my
I mean, it
entire
was
relationship
so
to the thing was just
stressful.
totally different.
Yeah. That was just such a stressful situation for you. And that's where we met.
Yeah. So you were, a surgical oncologist was going to, do all the taking out of the cancer and testing lymph nodes, and then you did the closing, um, which
Yeah.
was a little bit different because of the placement of my tumors, but really
Right.
not that. It really looks just like anybody else's.
Yeah. And you did really well with the surgery and you recovered really well, but then you had this aggressive cancer and you
Yeah.
had to have a whole series of treatments, which, when you went into the surgery, you weren't sure what was going to happen. So then tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the way that my oncologist put it was, give me a year and I'll give you your life. Because as far as we knew, they had gotten all the cancer from the surgery.
Sure.
My kind of cancer was so aggressive that if it came back, it would be incurable. And so we did a year of chemo, and
Which
it was
was
just, it was
brutal, right?
absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
I almost died 3 times, like within seconds of dying, like 3 times. Um, and I was allergic to everything, and I was just in horrible pain. And I learned later, it might actually be because I was healthy, because the younger and healthier you are, the
Yeah.
more your body has the energy to fight this alien thing that's happening to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
But I mean, I remember seeing you at some point in the middle of that, and you were just so debilitated. And it was the chemo, now it's a little more targeted in some instances, but then it was just the blast effect. And so
It's medieval.
yeah.
It's
And
medieval. It's just like, how close can we get you to death and hope
yeah,
that
and hope
you
that we
survive
don't
and the cancer
actually,
doesn't.
right. But you got through it, and then what happened?
Um, I was very, very traumatized.
Yeah.
And I don't think I didn't sleep through the night for 5, 6 years afterwards. Like I would wake up every night at least once, crying, screaming. So I really, I kind of think of those as like the lost years
Yeah.
my life, because
And
I was going through the motions, but like I wasn't working on my career. I wasn't, making new friends. I wasn't dating. I wasn't any, like I was just, yeah,
you were 27, 28 was kind of that range. But then you got better.
I did. Yeah. Yeah.
And you got your health back.
Yes.
And I mean, you're vibrant, you're working, you're making music. And then your brother decided to transition somewhere along the way.
Yeah. He was older. He was in his 30s when he decided. And because it had been such a long time, I think once once he finally allowed himself to realize, it like he got surgery quite quickly and started hormones quite quickly. And like, I just, it was, there weren't the kinds of questions
Hmm.
towards him that there were towards me,
Sure.
because our family had had time to live with it and get used to that idea, but also just, the way that you were questioning the way that you would question a 19-year-old about their decisions is very different than how you would question a 30-year-old who clearly has been thinking about this for 30 years,
Uh-huh. And did he talk to you about it and confide in
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
And were you surprised? Were you
I mean, yes and no. I think for a long time when he was sort of like trying to convince himself, that he wasn't trans, he would say like, there's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with society. Like, there's
right?
nothing wrong with my body. There's nothing wrong with the way I present myself. Like, you all are the problem. I'm not the problem. Why should I change myself for you?
Yeah.
And so, which makes sense to me. Like,
No,
if
absolutely.
if that's how you feel and you're comfortable how you are, then 100%. Um, and I think it's really, I also think it's damaging to like, um, to frame people's transition as being more or less legitimate, whether it's for yourself or for other people. Like, we're social animals. Like, of course it
Yeah,
matters how people respond to us. And when
sure.
someone is misgendering you like all day, every day for your whole life, that has an enormous toll. So in some ways I was surprised because he had been saying that for a long time and it really made sense to me.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I wasn't surprised at all because it made perfect sense.
And how have your parents, they like you were groundbreaking in this in your family and in, I'm sure in your social circles. And so now your parents had already like gone through a lot of acceptance. And um so was it easier for Miller as a result of you?
You know, so between my coming out and him coming out, our father passed. So our father wasn't here anymore when Miller transitioned. Um, in some ways it was better, uh, but I was actually much more angry about the way that our mom responded to him than I was about how she had responded to me.
Oh, interesting.
Partly because
I don't blame you.
she Yeah, partly because it's like easier to be mad on behalf of someone you love than yourself sometimes, but
Mhm.
also like basically she just she knew what she wasn't supposed to say, but nothing had really changed.
So
And
she
so it
knew
was
the rules better.
like it made it clear to me that she had I basically just wanted to say, like, you already ruined this between us. Like, do you know how lucky you are that you have a second chance with your other child to do better?
Mm,
And you're not.
yeah.
And I was so angry, like just being like, you had so much time to
Mhm.
read a book, to talk to somebody.
Mhm.
And, all she did was not say all the horrible things to him that she did to
Mhm.
me. She would just be like, okay,
But
okay.
it wasn't real acceptance or, So let's talk about that just for a second, because I think this is so important for families, for, loved ones, what how can they be supportive? And if they don't have the language, how can they learn? How can they learn what not to ask, how to be supportive? Like because you've been through this now with yourself, with your sibling, and I know you have a lot of friends in the community and you've seen it probably done very poorly and maybe not so poorly. So how can families be supportive?
I mean, there are so many more resources now, in terms of like amazing books and including like little kids' books,
Yeah.
for how to talk to your kids about it. Um, and, but, I really think just like some humbleness, humility
Yeah.
that it is okay that you don't understand something.
Mhm.
you know, because my mom was a feminist and, you know, really considered herself to be very political and an activist, I think she felt like it would never have occurred to her to go to a PFLAG meeting, you know,
Mhm.
because
I
like
think
it was
she
sort
felt
of,
like she already had some knowledge. Yeah. Yeah.
so I
Just
would say
for,
like, don't like go to a PFLAG meeting,
yeah.
like, you know, like it's,
Yeah.
you're not too good for it, you're not too smart for it, like you're not more too liberal for it, like be humble about learning things. And you know, yeah.
And PFLAG, just for our listeners, is an organization that is for parents of, I guess it's
Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, but
gay,
that's because
but
it's an
that's
old
an old name.
organization.
And
But
again, this speaks to what we were talking about,
yeah,
how the language has changed, but really now it's an organization that also is for parents of trans and non-binary folks. And it's a great organization. They have a lot of educational events. In COVID, a lot of them went remote and they're still remote. So you could easily, you know, even if you're not in a location, you could, you know, participate in things. And it's very educational. A lot of the people who work there are parents of kids who are gay or trans or non-binary. So they have a lot of firsthand experience also.
yeah, yeah.
And then how is your relationship with, you know, your sibling changed? Like when you look back and now, do you feel like especially allied because you're non-binary and Miller's trans?
I mean, I feel extremely lucky,
Yeah.
you know, as the younger sibling, like even though I came out as trans first, like we came out as queer together. And so, you know, he went to college and he's like sending me Stone Butch Blues. And, you know, I felt very lucky to have an older sibling who
Mm.
was allied with me and teaching me stuff, things that I wouldn't have had access to. But then also in our family, just like, I mean, not being the only trans person
Yeah,
at, you
yeah,
know, at Passover is really nice.
yeah,
Um,
right.
and, you know, I think it also, it really meant that our more extended family, you know, uncles and aunts and cousins and half siblings and stuff, it really was impossible to push it under the rug because there were
Right,
two of us.
right,
You
right. No, I think that it's you know, force in numbers.
Yeah,
And had it just been you, I think, you know, you easily could have been marginalized, right?
yeah. Yeah, and like even, you know, especially trans people from my generation, you know, they're because there were so few of us and we were often the first and alone, I think we internalized a lot of like what we have to take from
Mm-hmm.
people.
Yes.
And it's been when I've worked with with younger trans and non-binary people, it's been incredibly inspiring to me sometimes to like watch them get mad at things. And my
Mm-hmm.
first instinct is like, guys. And then I'm like, oh, wait, it is okay for me to be mad. That is unacceptable behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Why have I been taking this?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think, you know, it things that I might have just taken
Mm-hmm.
if it were only me, I wouldn't take because I wouldn't allow someone to do that to him. Um, and so I think it just allowed us to be fiercer allies for each other. And I could not be more grateful.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's really amazing. And now, can we talk a little bit about the family? I mean, now you're an uncle,
Sure,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, tell me about that. What's that like?
It's so wonderful. I mean, the kids are all right, y'all. It's just like the kids,
So
they're
Miller and his wife have two
yes,
babies. Well,
two
they're not
babies,
babies anymore. They're 4 and
4 and 7,
we have 7.
and they're so sweet. You know, obviously everything changes, but right now the 4-year-old identifies as non-binary. The 7-year-old is like just I mean, they ask people their pronouns. There was like this one time, some friends of Miller's were coming over, and it was the first time Rosie, the 7-year-old, had met
Yeah.
them. And it was like a very traditional looking straight cis couple. And Rosie knew that one of the people was the sister of someone that she knew.
Oh,
And when they introduced themselves, she said, which one of you is their sister?
oh,
And
so
like,
cute.
there's like a woman and like a dude with a beard. And she's like, which one of you is this sister?
Oh, that's so cute.
They're amazing. They're amazing.
And what's it like for you to be, have these little children that you're the uncle to? Is it awesome?
It's amazing. You know, I don't have kids and I don't want them. So this is like
Oh, this
really,
is the
I'm
best then.
so
This is like
invested.
having, like, it's like me. I'm looking forward to having grandchildren because you
It's
don't
the
have to
best.
actually, yeah, it's the greatest.
Actually, it's funny because when I started using they them pronouns, I didn't really make anything of it or tell people because I'm still okay with people using he him pronouns for me, and I just like didn't want to make a fuss. But then one time during a family Zoom, uh one of the kids asked me what my pronouns were. So the kids helped me come out about my pronouns to my family.
Oh, that's brilliant. That
I
is
know.
brilliant. Oh
I
my
know.
goodness.
Yeah.
That's
It's the
amazing.
best. Yeah,
That must have been quite a moment for you.
it was. Yes. Very sweet.
So, what's your hope for how things will change to make it easier for people to, figure out who they are and how to be happy and comfortable in their gender identity? And I mean, I feel like you have such a unique perspective just because of how how your transition evolved, how Miller's did, and then, kind of how you saw the community change and things, the certain things seem like maybe they're much easier now, but a lot of things are just as hard and tricky, and the political environment is so fraught right now. So
Yeah.
how do you think things will change or get better or worse?
I mean, it's hard. We're in a very bad moment in terms of, attacks against
Yeah.
trans people, actual trans people, and the idea of trans people, and non-binary people, and laws being passed all over. So, in some ways, yeah, some things are better. Like we have the internet now, you can find people,
Yeah.
you can build community. But
And do
if
you think that is a good way to build community?
I do. I mean, I fled to the city when I was 18, but like I, it's better in cities, and I am resentful of the fact that I had to come to a city to feel like I could find community.
Mhm.
So in small towns and rural areas, you're very likely to still be the only person, and that's really hard. But a
Yeah.
lot of people don't want to leave the places they live because they love them,
Right.
and
Right.
so it's really, I don't really think it's that much better.
Mhm.
Um, I think, seeing people like post that they're transitioning and seeing their parents comment, being like, "Yay, so proud of you!" Like that's different, um,
That is different, right?
to be sure.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, you know, I mean, I certainly, when I was growing up, there weren't any anti-trans laws. It's like, and so now it's like, oh, guess like the good news is we all acknowledge that you exist now. The
Yeah.
bad
Bad
news
news
is
is,
now we're going to try to make you not,
yeah.
so like
So
it's
that's a really good point. And what, why do you think there's so much sort of fear and animosity against trans and non-binary folks?
I mean, I think, you know, in some ways, like it just cuts at the core of people's ideas of themselves,
Mhm.
and um, especially masculinity, and I think that's one of the reasons, not certainly not only, but one of the reasons why there's so much more violence towards trans femme people, because the idea of transgressing like masculinity and patriarchy like that is just so abhorrent, and like it's like if you accepted that then your whole being would come undone,
Mhm.
sort of like what I was saying about my mom,
Mhm.
like
Yeah,
if
so it's sort of it's like the fear of the unraveling of society, basically.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and that's what they say, like when
Mhm.
you can hear
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
debates when they're debating these horrible laws, and like they literally are like they're demons.
Mhm.
Like um
And so what can we do to combat that? I mean,
I
is
mean,
there anything that you feel like, because to me, in my role, I started doing gender affirming surgery, and I didn't know any transgender people. I had never met anyone who was transgender. I mean, the first transgender person who I knew was my first patient. And so for me, it was just a matter of getting to know people and getting an understanding. And so, and then, now I'm talking 20 years ago, like you were saying, that people were so accepting and didn't get angry. And so people really educated me, and I asked the dumbest questions and used the most awkward language and probably said offensive things, without even realizing I was being offensive, because I just didn't have the language. But all of my patients and then people I came in touch with were so generous with their knowledge, and were so kind to me and my ignorance. And then, as soon as I understood, then, it's just, we're all just people, and people just trying to like find their personal expression that makes them feel comfortable. And so I didn't have any inherent bias or concern, but for me, it was just understanding. And then once I understood, then I accepted completely.
I'll never understand this about people. It's like, someone will be so homophobic and then their child comes out and they're like, of course I love my son and I'm going to his wedding. Like I didn't get it before, but now I get it. And I'm like, why does it have to be your own family member
Yeah.
before you can make the leap of empathy that everyone is someone's child? Like,
Yeah.
so it's like, I don't understand what that is about how our brains are wired, but the fact that there are proportionally very few of us means that there are just a lot more people out there who have never met a trans person or
Yeah.
don't they've met a trans person.
Right.
And I think that's hard too.
Yep. And maybe it just comes down to tribe, like that basically we're all very tribal, and that we seek same and we're scared of other. And this is an area where, a lot of people just, it's easy for them to put trans and non-binary people in the other category.
And I will say also, because you were talking about your patients, like this is also like a little bit of a generational divide, I think. Like
Yeah.
I was talking about young people earlier who were like getting all up in arms and making me realize that I deserved to be up in arms.
Yeah.
But it also cuts the other way, because people my age were so often the only ones. You could not afford, no one was disposable. Like
No.
if someone, like, I see, younger people now being like, you got my pronouns wrong, like fuck you forever. And
Right.
like, I am genuinely thrilled that you have enough queer and trans and non-binary community that you can say that to somebody, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And no one was disposable, no one was left behind. And if someone had genuine, like, good intentions,
Yeah.
then you did the work with them,
Yeah.
and I do, we are not, it is not our responsibility to educate. Obviously, not everyone has to do that, but it also is okay when you are invested in people and you care about them and they want to come along. So, I think for non-trans people who, want to learn, definitely taking some initiative and like learning on your own is good, but like, you can ask a trans person, like, I have questions that I'm like, I would love to know your experience. Like, I totally know it's not your responsibility to do that. Like, let me know if you would be open to, otherwise, like, I promise this is 100% fine. We don't ever have to speak of it again,
Yeah.
because some people do have the energy to help bring those people along, especially if it's people we care about.
Yeah. I mean, that is what I did. And people were so generous with me. And I just was like, I'm going to ask these really awkward questions because I don't know how to talk about this. And, and then I did try to read, but there wasn't a lot, back in the day. And now there are more resources. Well, we're going to wrap up, but in our notes, we're going to link to your band, which is Low Tide. And do you have a website?
Let me see. Yes, we have a band camp. So it's
Aw.
It's lowtide14.bandcamp.
Tide 14. So cool.
My lucky number.
And Eli, thank you so much. It has been so awesome talking to you and such a pleasure. And you're so open, and I really appreciate your sharing all your really like intimate stories about your transition and your illness. And so thank you.
Miller and I will always be here. You are our savior.